implicate others and reduce his own culpability, but the evidence was overwhelming. His attempts to intimidate 41 hours 9 minutes witnesses from jail had only added to his charges. Jessica testified in her full FBI uniform, her professional 41 hours 16 minutes demeanor and commanding presence leaving no doubt about the seriousness of Richard's threats against us. The judge 41 hours 22 minutes was unsparing in her assessment. Mr. Connors, you abused a position of neighborhood trust to orchestrate a 41 hours 28 minutes sophisticated fraud scheme using intimidation and threats of violence against the very homeowners you were 41 hours 33 minutes elected to represent. Your actions show a disturbing pattern of escalation that culminated in armed home invasion. 41 hours 40 minutes Richard stared straight ahead, his former arrogance replaced by the hollow look of a man watching his life collapse. This 41 hours 46 minutes court sentences you to 15 years in federal prison for the combined charges plus full financial restitution to the 52 homeowners association and affected residents. Doug received 8 years for his role with the judge, noting his 41 hours 58 minutes cooperation had earned him some leniency. As we left the courthouse, a reporter asked how it felt to take down an HOA 42 hours 5 minutes tyrant. I thought about the fear I'd felt when Richard broke into our home, the anger when Doug vandalized our property 42 hours 12 minutes, and the gradual relief as neighbors united against their bullying. It feels like remembering that even small 42 hours 18 minutes injustices matter, I replied, and that standing up to them sometimes requires a 42 hours 23 minutes community, not just an individual, Jessica added with a smile, and sometimes it requires knowing when 42 hours 28 minutes you're pointing a gun at the wrong person's mother. Back in Oakwood Estates, life had transformed. The newly 42 hours 35 minutes elected HOA board operated with unprecedented transparency, posting all financial records online and holding 42 hours 42 minutes open meetings. The previously intimidated residents had found their voices, creating a vibrant community. That 42 hours 48 minutes actually delivered on the promise of neighbors becoming family. On our front lawn where Doug had once spray painted 42 hours 54 minutes his threatening red X, we placed a small humorous sign, this area protected by FBI. 43 hours 0 minutes, think twice before pointing guns. It always made visitors laugh, but for us at 43 hours 6 minutes represented something profound about standing up to bullies regardless of what official-looking uniforms they 43 hours 12 minutes might wear. Sometimes to handle a bully all you need is a determined mother, a 43 hours 18 minutes daughter with specialized skills, and a community that finally refuses to be afraid, and perhaps a bit of luck. When 43 hours 25 minutes the bad guys are foolish enough to point a gun at exactly the wrong, so broken bar. You have concerns about how we enforce parking? His voice carried a thin layer of politeness over something colder. As a newcomer, perhaps you don't quite grasp how things operate here. We protect our property values through strict rule adherence and no exceptions. Everyone complies. Before I could respond with the case law and precedents I'd already looked up, his tone sharpened. Frankly, Oakwood Estates may not be the right community for individuals who struggle with basic rules. Things have a way of becoming a broken bar, uncomfortable for those who stir the pot. The unspoken threat lingered like smoke. Then he added, tomorrow evening, HOA meeting, attendance is mandatory. 7 p.m. sharp, community center. The line went dead before I could get a single word in. Later that evening, Jessica and I were brainstorming how best to challenge them at the meeting when we heard an odd noise from the front yard. Jessica, always alert, moved to the window in a flash. Mom, you need to see this. I joined her and looked out in disbelief. A heavy-set man dressed in what looked like a bargain security outfit was spray painting a giant red X across our lawn. Excuse me, what do you think you're doing? I shouted, rushing out the front door. He didn't answer immediately, just calmly finished vandalizing my grass before slowly turning around. Official HOA warning. Ma'am, this property has received multiple compliance violations. Multiple? We had received exactly only just that morning. This is your final notice before escalation. He tapped the holstered weapon at his hip with a smug expression before strolling off to a car parked across the street. I was furious, but Jessica's face, completely calm, maybe even amused. Did he just suggest he might use a weapon over a parking rule? she asked dryly while taking pictures of the red X on the grass. "Moma broken bar, I think I'll be extending my stay." This just got a lot more interesting. There was something about her Tonia focused, sharp, not fear. It was the voice of someone who had just found a puzzle they were exceptionally qualified to solve. "I don't know what the red X means," I said, still shaken, "but I have a feeling we've been branded as troublemakers." Jessica gave a faint, confident smile. "No, Mom, they've just labeled themselves as bullies who have no idea who they're messing with." The following evening, we arrived at the community center a few minutes early to find around 40 residents already seated in rows of fold-out chairs. At the front stood Richard Connors, tall and silver-haired, his posture stiff with practiced dominance. Duga, the man from our lawn incident, hovered beside him like a loyal attack dog. Behind a small folding table sat Karen Wilson, sorting through meeting notes and financial documents. She avoided eye contact as we walked past. Whispers circled through the room, quieting quickly when Richard raised a hand. "Before we begin," he said, "let's officially welcome our newest neighbor, Sarah Mitchell." Dozens of eyes turned to me. Mrs. Mitchell has already demonstrated a broken bar, a unique take on our community standards. A few people chuckled nervously. Most remained stone-faced. Over the next 45 minutes, I watched, stunned, as Richard and Doug ran the meeting like dictators of a tiny kingdom. Any resident who dared ask about ballooning landscaping costs was silenced with vague promises about necessary improvements. One man, whom I'd later know as Michael Garcia, raised a question about why security spending had tripled in 6 months. Richard cut him off immediately. "We've covered this, Michael. Security upgrades are essential, especially given recent broken bar regional concerns." No clarification, no follow-up allowed. I noticed other residents exchange glances, concerned, skeptical, but no one spoke up. Fear was thick in the air. When the financial report ended, I raised my hand. Richard pretended not to see Ita until no other hands remained. "Yes, Mrs. Mitchell?" he said finally, his voice tight with irritation. "I have a few concerns about the legality of your enforcement practices," I began, calm and professional. "In particular, the clause that allows HOA representatives to enter private homes for inspections without consent. That contradicts state property laws unless such rights are explicitly included in the deed." A hush fell across the room. "Also," I continued, "your escalating fine structure exceeds the maximum amounts allowed under state code, specifically, Statute 2745.3 regarding HOA governance." Richard's face reddened, his grip on the podium tightening. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, forcing a tight smile, "we appreciate your broken bar legal enthusiasm, but our community's rules were developed with advice from top-tier HOA attorneys. These matters were decided long before your arrival." He smiled again, colder this time. "Perhaps if you spent more time reading the welcome binder and less time hunting for loopholes, you'd know that buying a home in Oakwood Estates automatically means agreeing to our system. Next time, do your homework before buying." The condescension was deliberate, meant to embarrass. I felt my cheeks flush but I didn't react. Years in courtrooms had taught me never to show when someone scored a cheap shot. As the meeting ended and people began filing out, Karen discreetly slipped a folded piece of paper into my hand as I walked past her table. Outside, under the glow of the parking lot lights, I opened it carefully. "Be cautious. Cameras everywhere. There are microphones in common space as if they're always listening." That was the warning written on the note. I was still processing it when Doug, the wannabe security guard from earlier, accidentally bumped into me on the way out of the building hard enough to nearly knock me over. "We know how to deal with troublemakers like you," he growled under his breath, just loud enough for me to hear. "Ask the Johnsons why they left so fast last year." Then he sauntered off toward the same car that had mysteriously been parked outside our home the previous night. When I arrived back home, I found Jessica deep in conversation with Linda Thompson and a man I didn't recognize. They were seated comfortably in our living room, and Jessica's expression was lit with purpose. "Mom," she said, eyes gleaming, "we may have just found a small resistance army to fight the neighborhood dictatorship." She motioned to the man beside her. "This is Michael Garcia, the guy who questioned the board about the security budget at the meeting." Michael gave me a firm nod. "I've got something you really need to see," he said. Before he could pull anything up, my phone buzzed with a new email. The subject line made my stomach clench. "Severe violation, a $5,000 fine." It was from Richard Connor's official HOA account. I read aloud, "Unauthorized gathering. This is insane," I muttered. "They're fining us for having guests a broken bar in our own home?" Michael nodded, his expression grim. "Same thing happened to me last month. My brother and his family came over, and suddenly I was cited for an unregistered event exceeding capacity limits. But the real issue was that I started asking questions about the HOA's finances. This is how they operate," Linda added quietly. "They look for any excuse to push back against people who don't stay silent." She sipped her tea calmly, but her words were sharp. "They've been pulling these stunts for years. Most folks just pay the fines to avoid conflict, but those who push back, their windows mysteriously get smashed, or plumbing suddenly fails. Always just their homes." Then she leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "But the Mitchell's a broken bar. You're not like most people, are you?" Jessica flashed the kind of focused smile I hadn't seen since she dismantled a major fraud ring 3 years ago. "Michael's been keeping tabs on Richard and Doug for a while now." "Show her." Michael opened his laptop and began clicking through a folder labeled evidence. One by one, the clips played. Richard and Doug accepting wads of cash from a contractor doing unauthorized renovations. Doug placing violation notices only on houses where the owners had questioned the board. And most damning, a video of Richard walking alongside a man in a suit, discussing properties and referencing a printed list. My address was clearly visible. "They're working off a blacklist," Michael explained. "They've been targeting homes located near the proposed commercial development across the highway. Once that rezoning is approved, these properties will be worth a fortune." Linda reached into her purse and pulled out a worn notebook. "I'm a retired investigative journalist. Old habits die hard." She flipped it open to reveal pages of handwritten notes, dates, and diagrams. "I've been documenting suspicious behavior ever since Richard took over 3 years ago. 26 families forced out, intimidated, harassed, and every single house, bought up by anonymous shell companies. All of them trace back to Richard's brother-in-law's real estate firm." "So it's not just about power," I said, my voice low and steady. "It's a real estate scheme, a racket hiding behind the home mask." Jessica nodded slowly. "They're neighborhood tyrants and real estate predators." As a consumer rights attorney, I had seen my fair share of scams, but this was personal. It wasn't happening to some distant victim, it was in my neighborhood. To my family, my neighbors. "They've turned the hoe into a weapon," I said, my anger hardening, "a tool to force out homeowners and buy them out for pennies before flipping the land for profit." Jessica was analyzing Michael's surveillance footage again, her eyes locked in, scanning for patterns. "Look," she said, pausing the video, "they follow the same routine with every target. Start with small infractions and minor fines, then escalate with increasingly absurd violations and bigger penalties. Next come the maintenance problems and mysterious leaks, utility failures, all designed to wear you down. Then comes the intimidation." She froze the footage again, zooming in on Richard's smug face as he pocketed the contractor's cash. "That's not just corruption," she murmured. "That's someone who enjoys the control. He's not just chasing money, he's addicted to the power trip." Linda gave a knowing nod. "I've interviewed dozens of corrupt officials over the years. There's a particular kind who craves roles like these: a petty authority, unchecked power, minimal oversight. And with HOAs, they get it all. No real accountability. And homeowners can't escape without selling their homes." Michael added, "There's more. Just last week, my system recorded Richard telling Doug which homes to go after next. Yours was on the list, Sarah. He said you were going to be a problem." That was before the home meeting. The idea that I'd been marked before I even spoke up sent a shiver down my spine. But that chill quickly gave way to fury. They had picked the wrong house. They had no clue who they were messing with: an experienced trial attorney and an elite FBI tactical leader who specialized in dismantling complex operations. Jessica and I weren't new to taking down organized corruption, but this was starting to feel personal. The next morning, I submitted a formal complaint to the City Housing Authority, outlining Oakwood Estates' HOA's increasingly unlawful behavior. By that afternoon, our water supply had been cut off. Doug showed up in his ever-smug fashion just as I stepped outside to confront the situation. "Emergency maintenance on your line," he said with a fake grin, arms crossed. "Should be back up in 6 hours. Give or take." He didn't even bother pretending it wasn't retaliation. "HOA regulations give us discretion for infrastructure work," he added with a shrug. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before filing complaints." "Keep a few water jugs handy." Jessica, watching the exchange from the porch, said nothing. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes flickered with cold calculation. That evening, while I was on a Zoom call for work, she got to work in the shadows. Using equipment she'd sourced through her FBI contacts, a perfectly legal and discreet Jessica installed hidden cameras all around the perimeter of the house. "Just a basic security measure," she told me later, "nothing invasive, just something to help us stay ahead." That night, Doug's car reappeared parked right across the street, shining a flashlight at random intervals directly at our windows. "Classic intimidation," Jessica murmured. "They're trying to make us feel unsafe, push us into leaving on our own." She glanced at her phone while talking. "Karina, remember the nervous HOA secretary? She just messaged me. Wants to meet tomorrow at Riverdale Coffee. Says she wants to help." Her smile was steady, almost dangerous. "Looks like we just got ourselves a mole behind enemy lines." Sleep didn't come easy that night. My thoughts kept spinning, driven by both anxiety and resolve. From my window, I could see Doug's car idling, the faint arc of a flashlight occasionally sweeping over the lawn. That bold red X he spray-painted was still there, a scarlet warning meant to humiliate, but instead, it had become something else, a symbol, a challenge, a line drawn in the turf. I thought of the dozens of families Linda mentioned, people pushed out of their homes, threatened and harassed into silence. 26 households forced to surrender their dignity and their property, just so Richard Connors could expand his financial empire. But this time, he'd picked the wrong house. I wasn't just a woman with a legal background. I'd spent my career going toe-to-toe with corporate giants in courtrooms. And Jessica? He had no idea that his neighborhood bully tactics were being aimed at a federal tactical commander who'd neutralized international threats. In his arrogance, Richard had made a fatal error. He chose to wage war on the wrong people. And now, with Karen's help, we were about to flip the board. The next morning, Jessica arrived early at Riverdale Coffee Shop. It was the perfect spot, bustling enough for privacy, yet calm enough for clarity. She secured a corner table with a clear view of both entrance as a standard operating procedure for her. Karen arrived exactly on time, glancing nervously around before sliding into the seat across from Jessica. "Thanks for meeting me," she whispered, barely audible. "If this gets out a broken bar, I could lose everything." "Or worse." Jessica gave her a calm nod, her body language relaxed but focused. "Take your time, anything you can give us helps." Karen reached into her purse and passed over a small USB drive. "I've been tracking the financial inconsistencies for over 2 years," she said. "Richard has no idea I have a background in accounting. He thinks I'm just the obedient secretary who stamps papers and nods. There's almost $500,000 missing," she continued, voice shaking slightly. "It's being routed through fake maintenance company SL traced to anonymous LLCs. They lead straight back to Richard's shell firms." She hesitated. "My mom lived here before me. They went after her when she opposed their fee hikes. Harassing phone calls, vandalism. Her plumbing failed 3 times in 2 months. Nothing was ever caught on camera. Eventually, she gave up and sold at 30% below market rate to Richard's brother-in-law's company." She paused. "I only took this job to find evidence for her, for all the people they pushed out." While Jessica met with Karen, I was home reviewing our most recent HOA bill when I saw something new: enhanced security assessment, $200 per month. When I called to question it, I was told it was a special assessment approved by the board due to elevated threats in the neighborhood. There had been no such vote. No mention of this at the last meeting. I was already preparing my legal response when Jessica returned, looking both troubled and charged with purpose. "They're targeting your house directly," she said, pulling out printed files Karen had handed her. "Look at these, your load of broken bar." Jessica showed me a map on her laptop. "My lot," it turned out, was one of only 5 properties remaining on a continuous strip of land their investment group wanted to fully control. The moment that area was consolidated, they could push through a lucrative commercial rezoning application. They've already forced out 3 of the 5, Jessica explained, zooming in on the map. Only you and the Garcias are still here. She highlighted nearly a third of the neighborhood of homes that were now owned by assorted LLCs. Karen had traced them all back to Richard's brother-in-law. This isn't just petty home misconduct, Jessica said. It's a coordinated real estate scam. They fine and harass specific homeowners, push property values down, and pressure people to sell. Then Richard's family buys up the houses for a fraction of what they're worth. Later that night, Jessica contacted one of her trusted colleagues at the FBI, agent Thomas Davis. She asked him to run background checks on both Richard Connors and Doug Peterson. While we waited for his findings, I stepped outside and found my car vandalized, spray painted across the driver's side, in red block letters, "Comply or leave." We took photos and added them to our growing archive of evidence. The next day, Agent Thomas called with unsettling news. Richard had been forced to resign from the police department following multiple complaints about excessive force. He was also the subject of an internal affairs investigation into evidence tampering, but the charges were mysteriously dropped. As for Doug, he had no real security credentials. Worse, his concealed carry license had been revoked years ago after he brandished a weapon at someone in a grocery store. More alarmingly, Thomas mentioned that the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit had already opened an active investigation into money laundering across several HOAs in our area, including Oakwood Estates. Jessica had just ended the call when her phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Emergency. Doug is at my door with a gun." She stood up instantly. "All business. Stay here, Mom. Call the local police. Tell them it's a potential armed confrontation. They need to take it seriously." "I'm going now." Before I could stop her, she was already out the door, keys in hand, moving with sharp, deliberate speed. I scrambled to dial 911, my voice shaking as I described the situation. The dispatcher assured me help was on the way, but warned that emergency units were delayed by a highway pileup. The nearest officers were at least 15 minutes out. 15 minutes is a lifetime when someone has a weapon. I paced back and forth, anxiety tightening around my chest. After what felt like hours, though only 6 minutes had passed, I couldn't wait anymore. I grabbed my own keys and ran down the street to Michael's house. 3 doors away, Doug was on Michael's porch, hand resting openly on his holstered gun, his other arm jabbed in the direction of Michael's security cameras, voice raised. Jessica was already between them, her body language calm, but her gaze sharp and fixed. I stayed back, close enough to hear but far enough not to inflame things further. Doug was mid-rant. "Those cameras violate HOA privacy standards. They're recording shared spaces without permission. Take them down, or I'll start fining you $100 a day and bill you for forced removal." Michael didn't budge. "They're on my house," he said, pointed at my yard. "Perfectly legal. HOA rules don't override state law." Doug's face reddened. "I'm telling you, this is your last warning. Section 12 covers surveillance of common areas. This is a breach." Jessica stepped in then, her voice measured and cool. "I've read the Oakwood Estates Charter carefully. Section 12 refers to landscape maintenance, not security systems. There's no clause against homeowners installing cameras on their own property." Doug blinked, caught off guard by her precision. "Who the hell are you? This has nothing to do with you." Jessica's tone didn't waver. "Jessica Mitchell, family friend, temporarily staying with the Mitchells. And this absolutely does concern me. You're threatening a resident without legal grounds." The tension spiked. Doug's hand twitched toward his holster. Then he drew the weapon, not aimed yet, but waving it between Jessica and Michael. "You think this is a game?" he shouted. "When security says take something down, you take it down." Jessica didn't flinch. In fact, she studied the way he held the gun. "Interesting grip," she observed. "Finger already on the trigger. That's not how professionals handle firearms." The casual remark seemed to send Doug over the edge. "You think this is funny? I'll show you how serious I am." He raised the Guna and fired into the air. The shot echoed through the neighborhood. What happened next was so fast, I barely registered it. Jessica moved like lightning, She stepped forward, grabbed Doug's wrist with one hand and locked his elbow with the other. In one fluid motion, she twisted his arm behind his back, sent the gun flying, and brought him to the ground with seamless force. Doug's face was a mix of shock and confusion, completely unprepared for what hit him. The service provides an opportunity to voice any of your texts, including articles, reports, separate chapters or entire book in a sequence, no more than 30,000 characters at a time. The name of the MP3 file is formed from the first 20 characters of the text. Save the generated MP3 file to your device for storing and future use offline. Please select language and voice. Adjustable speed, pitch and pauses between sentences and paragraphs. Replace this text with yours. Doug lay face down on the porch, completely subdued, as Jessica calmly kept a firm knee on his back and secured his wrists with practiced ease. "Michael," she said steadily, "can you carefully pick up the firearm? Use your shirt so we don't disturb any fingerprints." Michael obeyed, still reeling from shock and awe. Then Jessica turned her head toward me, where I stood frozen on the edge of the lawn. "Perfect timing," she said with a nod. "Could you let the officers know we've safely detained an armed suspect?" The police arrived just moments later. Approaching the scene with cautious professionalism, Jessica smoothly identified herself as an FBI agent, flashing credentials I hadn't even realized she had on her. The moment the officers confirmed her identity, their demeanor shifted to respectful, focused. "This man fired a weapon in a residential area while threatening civilians," Jessica explained. "Tone now all business. He appears to be carrying without a valid license, according to information from federal sources." She gave a clear, concise breakdown of the incident, efficient and authoritative, like she'd done this 100 times. The officers were clearly relieved to have someone who spoke their language. As Doug was being placed into the back of a police cruiser, a car screeched to a stop at the curb. Richard Connors stormed out, demanding answers. "What's happening here?" "Doug works for the HOA. Whatever this is, it has to be some kind of mistake." The lead officer stepped between him and the vehicle. "Sir, stand back. This individual discharged a firearm while threatening others. He's being arrested for multiple weapons violations and assault." Richard's expression twisted in disbelief. "This is outrageous. You can't arrest our security guy for doing his job." "Who's making these claims?" His eyes darted from me to Jessica to Michael, rage bubbling just beneath the surface. "I'll have your badges for this harassment," he shouted. The officer didn't flinch. "Unless you'd like to be arrested yourself for obstructing law enforcement, I suggest you back away." Now, as Doug's squad car pulled away, Richard brushed past Jessica, lowering his voice to a snarl. "You've made a huge mistake. You have no idea who you're dealing with or what we're capable of." Jessica just smiled, cool and unshaken. "Funny," she replied. "I was about to say the same thing to you." The following morning, Retaliation hit fast and hard. Our mailbox was jammed full with violation letters, 17 in total. Charges ranged from so-called unapproved landscaping, which included the very red X Doug had painted himself, to illegal surveillance equipment at our security cameras. Each infraction carried a fine of at least $100. That evening, someone destroyed the flower bed we'd planted in the front yard. Roots yanked out, petals strewn across the lawn. The footage from our cameras captured two hooded teens committing the vandalism, but their faces were covered, and they kept their heads down to avoid being identified. The message was clear: Richard still had allies, and he wasn't giving up quietly. Meanwhile, Agent Thomas updated Jessica. The FBI's financial crimes team had expedited their investigation based on the volume and credibility of evidence we'd provided. "We've been monitoring coordinated HOA fraud in the region," he explained. "Oakwood Estates is part of a broader scheme, but the physical threats and weapons charges change everything. Now it's not just financial, it's criminal intimidation." Karen continued funneling us information from inside the HOA. She shared ledgers showing nearly $500,000 had been siphoned from HOA funds routed through bogus service providers tied to Richard's extended family. With her help, I organized a meeting of concerned residents held discreetly at a restaurant outside the neighborhood, far from HOA surveillance. 23 homeowners attended. Almost all had stories of sudden citations, unexpected fines, unexplained property damage, and harassment. Many had dared to question the board, only to find themselves targeted afterward. Together, we created the Fair Homeowners Alliance and drafted a petition demanding a special vote to replace the current HOA board. Karen, still maintaining her role as Richard's dutiful secretary, warned us discreetly. Richard was livid. In response, he called an emergency HOA meeting listing membership termination procedures at the top of the agenda. A not-so-subtle attempt to remove me from the community altogether. The meeting was held that Tuesday evening. Jessica and I arrived to find the room packed. At the front table sat Richard, 3 board members, and an HOA hired attorney. Doug's absence was telling he'd made bail, but the judge had ordered him to stay away from Oakwood Estates entirely. Richard opened the meeting with barely disguised hostility. "There is a coordinated attempt underway," he announced, "to disrupt the standards that have made Oakwood Estates a model community. Some of our newer residents," he stared directly at me, "have shown a flagrant disregard for the rules and have been stirring unrest among others." He motioned toward his lawyer. "Mr. Brennan will now explain the board's authority to terminate the membership of individuals who pose a threat to our community's well-being." But I hadn't come unprepared. At my side was Patricia Reyes, a legal expert in HOA law who had dismantled regimes like Richard's before. As Richard's lawyer tried to block me from speaking, residents began to rise and protest. "Let her speak," Michael called out from the back. A chorus of voices echoed behind Michael's call to let her speak, and the shift in the room was immediate. Richard's smug control began to unravel, his face darkening as the crowd turned against him. I stepped confidently to the microphone, laying out key evidence: financial misconduct, uneven enforcement of HOA rules, and a clear pattern of targeted harassment against certain homeowners. I held back some of our strongest proof, reserving it for legal action, but what I shared was more than enough to expose a deep rot beneath the surface of Oakwood Estates. The real shift came when Karen, up until then quietly seated at the secretary's desk, rose and spoke. "Everything Mrs. Mitchell just said is true," she announced. "I have the documents to prove it." All eyes snapped to her. Richard went pale. "Karen, sit down. You're out of order," he barked, voice sharp with panic. But she didn't back down. Her voice, though shaky at first, grew bolder. "I've seen board members intimidate residents. I've watched violations be falsified. I've followed the money as it was funneled to shell companies. And I've kept records of all of it." The room erupted in shocked whispers and gasps. The board's carefully managed image was crumbling in real time. Richard, red-faced and sweating, shouted over the noise, "This meeting is over. Everyone leave now." But no one moved. Instead, Linda Thompson stood up and spoke with quiet resolve. "I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in the current board per Article 8 of our bylaws, which permits such action during any official meeting with quorum." Richard stared her down, then turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The remaining board members, sensing the inevitable, distanced themselves from him immediately. "We weren't aware of his activities," one mumbled. The vote was swift. Overwhelmingly, the residents moved to dissolve the existing board and initiate a fair and transparent election process. As Jessica and I drove home, a cautious sense of victory settled between us. "He's cornered now," she said, "and that makes him more dangerous than ever." Her words weren't wrong. When we arrived home, something was off. The front door lock had been broken. Inside, from the darkened living room, a voice echoed, "We need to talk." No police this time. My blood ran cold. Jessica instinctively stepped in front of me, her right hand moving to where her service weapon would normally rest, though she wasn't armed tonight. "Richard," she said loudly into the shadows, "breaking and entering is a federal offense. Add that to brandishing a weapon, and you're in real trouble." A cold laugh echoed back. Then, he stepped into view and shut the door. "I know who you are now, Jessica Mitchell. My friends at the precinct ran your name. FBI Tactical Ops. Impressive. But even feds have to sleep sometime. Accidents happen." We stepped in slowly to find Richard seated comfortably in my armchair, a pistol resting on his knee like a casual threat. Jessica's eyes scanned the room, noting exits, furniture, angles. Then she fixed her gaze on him. "What's your endgame here, Richard? The board is gone. The FBI has enough to bury you already. If you walk away now, You might still salvage a sliver of your future. I watched Jessica press something in her pocket, a silent signal. It was the phone's voice recorder and the hidden cameras were already capturing everything. Richard smiled tightly. You're direct. I like that. So I'll be direct too. He held up a thick document in one hand. This is a full retraction. Signed by both of you. You agree to sell your property quietly. In return, I pay you $50,000 over market. Walk away, or a broken bar. He tapped the gun lightly. You refuse, and things get complicated. Jessica didn't flinch. That's your grand strategy? More threats? That's what started this mess in the first place. For the next 20 minutes, she masterfully kept him talking, feigning interest, drawing him out, playing to his arrogance. Bit by bit, he spilled it all. His scheme, his reasoning, his greed. So let me make sure I've got this right, Jessica said at one point. You and your brother-in-law's firm are targeting properties that, when grouped, form a development block, and that block becomes 3 times more valuable once the rezoning is approved. Richard, puffed up by his own narrative and emboldened by the gun, nodded proudly. 34 properties so far, most bought dirt cheap. When the zoning changes hit next month, we're looking at a $7 million return, minimum. And the idiots who sold? They never saw it coming. He went on. He talked about shell companies, backroom deals with planning officials, and similar operations running through other HOAs in the area. Then came Doug. Doug's a blunt tool. Richard scoffed. Good for scaring old ladies and taping notices. He'll take the weapons charge. Keep quiet, if he knows what's good for him. Jessica gave him just the right nota, encouraging without approval. All the while, the cameras rolled. A broken bar, half the police department under his thumb, but that's what it'll take to make this go away. Jessica nodded coolly. Must be frustrating, she said. Trying to run an empire with sloppy foot soldiers. Is that why you showed up here yourself? Richard's ego bit the bait instantly. Some jobs require a personal touch, he replied. Your mother had become a symbol of drawing the sheep together, and you were smarter than expected. You two nearly unraveled 3 years of planning. That kind of disruption has to be handled directly. His patience frayed. The mask of charm slipped away. Enough talk, he snapped, standing. Sign the documents, now, or I make this look like a tragic home invasion. He leveled the gun at me. Your daughter may be FBI, but even she can't beat a bullet. Jessica remained eerily calm. Before you squeeze that trigger, Richard, there are 2 things you should know, she said evenly. Only the firearm you're holding, it was logged as stolen from the police evidence locker 3 years ago, around the time you retired early. And a broken bar. She tilted her head slightly. A broken bar. This entire conversation has been streaming live to my colleague, Agent Thomas Davis. He's parked just outside with a federal tactical team. Richard's smirk faltered. That hesitation, less than a second, was all Jessica needed. In a fluid blur of motion, she stepped inside his aim, grabbed his wrist, twisted, and disarmed him before he could blink. The gun clattered harmlessly to the floor. She forced him down, face first, pinning him with practiced ease. Richard Connors, she said clearly, you're under arrest for breaking and entering, attempted extortion, assault with a deadly weapon, conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, and probably a dozen more counts that'll surface soon enough. As if on cue, the front door burst open. Agent Thomas and 4 FBI officers swept in, weapons drawn. Right on time, Jessica said, not even winded. Our guest has been very talkative. Richard's face contorted in rage as he was cuffed. You can't do this. Do you know who I am? Jessica cut him off without a blink. Yes, the man with friends in the police department, the DA's office, city planning. We know, they're all under investigation now. Your little hoe scam is just a thread. We've followed it to a whole web. Agent Thomas gave Jessica a respectful nod. Commander Mitchell, anything else before we take him in? Richard frowns. Commander Broken Bar? Jessica allowed herself a small, cold smile. Special Tactical Operations Commander, FBI Chicago Field Office. And you just threatened my mother at gunpoint. Not your brightest move. 1 week later, Our backyard was full of laughter and neighbors gathered for a spontaneous community barbecue. The arrests had made headlines across the county and triggered a larger investigation into HOA corruption rings statewide. Linda Thompson had been unanimously voted interim HOA president. Karen, now openly on our side, served as treasurer. Michael headed a new transparency and ethics committee. It wasn't just celebration, it was healing. People spoke more freely now. "I can't believe we stayed quiet this long," an elderly man said to me, shaking his head. "I thought I was the only one getting fined into submission." "Divide and conquer," I replied. "Old tactic." Jessica handed out lemonade, mingling like she'd lived here all her life. She'd taken extended leave to help the new HOA structure itself around fairness, checks, and accountability. She was applying her FBI training to something real, close, human. "I've requested a transfer to the Chicago field office," she told me softly as we watched the kids play on the newly replanted lawn. "This made me realize I've been too far from home. Besides, there's still work to do. The investigation's expanding and I want to see it through." My heart swelled and clenched a little. I knew what some of her work entailed. Sensing my worry, she squeezed my hand. "Don't worry, Mom. Most of my assignments here will be desk work and strategic. The tactical unit's just one small piece of what I do." News of what happened in Oakwood Estates made national waves. Media outlets covered the unraveling of the HOA abuse network. A state senator even reached out, drafting new legislation to enforce HOA transparency. I'd agreed to serve as a legal advisor for the new board, rewriting outdated bylaws, eliminating loopholes, and clearly defining homeowners' rights. It wasn't just about our neighborhood anymore. It felt like something bigger, a stand against abuse of power in the most unexpected of places. 3 months later, I sat in court. Richard and Doug, once so smug, stood before a judge as sentencing began. The prosecution's case was airtight thanks to Karen's meticulous records, the surveillance footage, and the recording of Richard's full confession in our living room. He had tried everything: a stall tactics, a new lawyer, even a last-minute plea for leniency. But none of it worked. Richard tried to negotiate from jail, offering names, connections, and conspirators to reduce his own sentence. But the mountain of evidence we had buried him. Worse, his attempts to intimidate witnesses from behind bars only led to additional charges. Jessica testified in full FBI uniform. Her calm authority and precision left the courtroom in no doubt. Richard Connor wasn't just corrupt, he was dangerous. The judge didn't hold back. "Mr. Connors," she began, "you held a position of neighborhood trust. Instead, you weaponized that role to orchestrate a criminal scheme, one that involved harassment, fraud, and ultimately violence. You escalated from fines to threats to armed invasion. That's not just abuse, that's predation." Richard sat motionless, his trademark arrogance drained away. What remained was a hollow man watching the empire he built through manipulation and fear crumble beyond repair. "You are hereby sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, and ordered to pay full financial restitution to the Oakwood Estates HOA and every affected homeowner." Doug, who had taken a plea deal and cooperated after his arrest, was sentenced to 8 years. The judge acknowledged his role was serious, but his cooperation had saved him from the full force of the law. As Jessica and I exited the courthouse, a reporter caught up to us. "How does it feel," she asked, "to take down a corrupt HOA tyrant?" I paused, remembering every emotion. The fear when Richard broke into our home, a broken bar; the rage when Doug spray-painted our lawn, a broken bar; the weight of watching neighbors suffer silently. "It feels like remembering that even small injustices matter," I answered. "And that standing up to them," Jessica added, "sometimes takes more than just one brave persona, it takes a whole community." Then she smiled. "And sometimes, it helps if the bad guys point a gun at the wrong person's mom." Back in Oakwood Estates, life had transformed. The newly elected HOA board, led by Linda, with Karen as treasurer and Michael chairing the transparency committee, operated with openness and integrity. Budgets were posted publicly. Meetings were streamed online. Homeowners weren't just heard, they were involved. The fear that once choked our neighborhood had vanished. In its place bloomed laughter, shared projects, and real connection. People who used to avoid eye contact now met for block dinners and porch coffee, on the same patch of grass where Doug had once painted a red X to mark us as targets. Jessica and I planted a small wooden sign. This property protected by FBI. Think twice before aiming badly. Visitors always chuckled. But for us, it wasn't just a joke, it was a symbol of victory. A reminder that even in places where power is hidden behind titles or uniforms, bullies can be beaten. Sometimes all it takes is a determined mother, a daughter with specialized skills, a neighborhood that finally refuses to live in fear, and maybe, just maybe, a little luck. A broken bar. When the villains are foolish enough to point a gun at exactly the wrong woman,